Hi everyone, Gemma here, welcome back to my channel. Today's video isn't calligraphy or stationery related, but as you could probably tell from the title, it's related to another art form, and that's watercolour painting. I'm going to be discussing how I recently discovered my love of watercolour, why I initially thought it was out of reach, and why you should give it a go yourself. But before I get into it, my channel covers calligraphy, stationery and card making. If these topics are also topics you're interested in, please consider subscribing for similar future content. Okay, first of all, before I get into why I love watercolour, I want to get into why I was scared to try watercolour. And I'm covering this because I imagine I'm not alone in being afraid to try a new art skill, whether that's watercolour or calligraphy. There's actually two reasons. One was straightforward, and that was the fact that I have a bad habit of jumping from one interest to another, and I didn't want to spend more money on something that I perhaps wouldn't be very good at or lose interest in. The second larger reason is frankly that I didn't feel I was good enough. I've always admired watercolour painting, but I felt that it was something that only real artists could do, and I didn't fall into that real artist category. Which I realise is silly. I don't know why I stopped myself from trying to learn something that I really admire. When it comes down to it, it's really just a self-esteem issue, and I think one of the best ways to improve self-esteem from personal experience is to push yourself out of your comfort zone, even if it's something as small as trying to learn watercolour. Also, everyone starts as a beginner. My calligraphy was terrible when I started compared to how it is now. But if it's something that you enjoy, improvement is just a lovely added benefit. So the point I'm making is that if you're nervous about trying a new art style that you admire, don't let your self-esteem get in the way. Give it a go, and maybe it's something you'll end up loving. Right, let's get into why I love watercolour. Now, I would still very much class myself as a newbie. I participated in a free watercolour painting course, and then I've casually painted here and there. Getting started was a bit intimidating at first because you need to get the right materials to be able to start, but the benefit of watercolour is that once you've gotten those materials, that's pretty much it as far as shopping is concerned. You'll obviously need to top up your paper supply when it runs out, but I think that the paint tubes will last a really long time, and that's because you can reuse paint that's dried on your palette, so there's much less waste. I also think that with calligraphy, it's very easy to get tempted into buying more and more brush pens as you want niche colours or different sizes, but I think there's less of that with watercolour. I mean, yes, you may want to try different brands eventually, but you can make any colour you want with the paints that you have available, and once you have your brushes, you'll always have that size available. I reckon you can get started with watercolour painting for around £30, but that amount will get you through for quite some time, and then you top up your paper as and when needed for around £5–6. That's one reason why I like watercolour painting as a hobby, is that it's not extortionate to get started or expensive to keep going with. Moving on to the second reason why I love watercolour, and that's the more abstract nature of watercolour. It's quite different to calligraphy that requires precision for neat and tidy strokes. The abstract quality of watercolour makes you let go a little, and in that respect it's quite freeing. Though, to be honest, I think learning any new art form can be quite freeing. I think when you've been learning one specific art form, such as calligraphy, for a while, you place this unfair expectation on yourself to always make top quality content, and that's just not the reality when creating something. Like with any other form of painting, the world is your oyster in terms of what you want to create, whether it's portraits or landscapes or abstract patterns. I personally most enjoy creating abstract patterns or leaves because they're quite straightforward and you don't have to think as much about what you're creating. You can just enjoy going through the motion of creating watercolour. Shout out to Kelly Creates for the tutorial on this specific leaves falling piece. It may sound silly, but I wouldn't have thought to paint upside down and then flip the piece around at the end, and it makes painting so much easier. On to my third reason, and that's mixing colours is fun. It seems like something so small, but it's really fun to play about with the colours. I love creating one-of-a-kind colours and creating complementary colour schemes. I like creating a variety of different pretty pinks for creating florals or different oranges for autumn leaves. I think it's given me a new appreciation of colour, and I found myself paying attention to the colours around me more and to the colour of local flowers and scenery. My tip for other beginners is to buy a large palette, because sometimes it's hard to let go of colours that you create, so it's nice to have a large palette so that you can hold on to them until you want to use them again. My next reason is simply that it looks really pretty. Watercolour has such a softness to it that I'm personally really drawn to. I like the transparency of some of the colours and the way that you can overlap the colours to add another element to the painting. I guess it's tricky to go in depth into why I like the look of it, but if you also like the look of watercolour, you'll know exactly what I mean. I also think that it's fairly easy to achieve something pretty even as a newbie when creating with watercolour. Like with any art form, it takes a while to master, but I think the abstract and softness of watercolour painting means that even if you're creating abstract patterns, you can create something that you're proud of. My final reason is that it pairs nicely with calligraphy. The two art forms can be used together to form pretty pieces. So for example, you could create a wreath of some form with watercolour and then use calligraphy in the middle, or you could paint a flower and then draw calligraphy underneath it. It's nice that you can incorporate both art forms side by side rather than it being a case of using one or the other. It's also worth mentioning that watercolour calligraphy is a thing. It's not something I've really experimented with yet, but it's something I hope to learn as well. To sum up my 5 reasons for loving watercolour and why I think you should get started, the first is that it's fairly affordable to get into and keep up with. The second is that its abstract nature is quite freeing. Thirdly, mixing colours is fun. Next, it looks pretty. And finally, it pairs nicely with calligraphy. If there are some reasons that you think I missed off, please comment them down below. Okay, so that's the end of today's video. I wanted to give a shout out to Becca, Courtice and Stephanie Fehrenbach for organising a wonderful free watercolour course that was incredibly helpful for a beginner like me. It got me really comfortable with the basics and helped stop me from feeling overwhelmed. It's also really nice to do a course at the same time as other beginners and sharing progress at the same time. It makes you feel much less alone when you get into grips with something new. What I'll do is I'll post a link in my description of a video of theirs discussing watercolour florals, if that's something you're interested in. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'd be interested to know if watercolour is something that you've already tried or if it's something you would like to try. Hopefully this video encouraged you to try. Also let me know if you'd like to see me incorporate the odd watercolour painting video on my channel, and subscribe if you would like to see more content on calligraphy, stationery and card making. And thank you for watching.